Hello and welcome to Journalist Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide, which are affecting the continent, and we look at how these issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Priscilla Winkpo, and I'm pleased to welcome our panel. Tunde Osho, Deputy Director of News at TVC. Vuyosewa Ngombongwana, broadcaster. And Ayo Johnson, journalist and specialist in African affairs. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very interesting week this week. We've had the situation where an American and a Canadian were kidnapped in Kaduna. And over in Cape Town, there was an issue about running out of water. And of course, the very undiplomatic comment by President Donald Trump has been turned around from Namibia to say, hey, why don't you come and visit this particular African country and determine for yourself whether or not it is as described by President Trump. But having said all of that, there is an issue going on in Africa at the moment that is extremely worrying. And that's the issue that, you know, in Nigeria, it has drawn a lot of highlights because we've had 73 people die in Benue State as a result of herdsman attack, as it were. I want to come to you first, certainly, because it's been said, there's a suggestion that climate change is driving herdsmen south, and as a result of that, that's why we're seeing these clashes. But coming from Nigeria, where we had this high, you know, incident, how do you see the situation?
Well, I know that climate change is actually having an effect, but we've always had herdsmen in the south for years. I mean, for as long since I was a little boy, we've always had them coming south, and you've always seen them with their, you know, shepherd's stick. You know, that's all they had. But now you have herdsmen who are carrying attack rifles. They're carrying, you know, weapons of you know, super strength. I don't know why you need that to herd your cattle. You know, so that is the question. And you know, so many states, you know, are just having their people killed. You know, it's not even about herding the cattle now, because in Benue State, you know, the 73 people that were just killed, they were sleeping. You know, it was in the middle of the night, so it's not like they were provoked by anyone. You know, okay. So it brings up more questions as to why these things are happening.
First of all, I see that you're, you know, shaking your head to this. As Tunde says, they're carrying weapons, there are guerrilla tactics, and you know, Amnesty is reporting total anarchy in the case of Nigeria, but it's right across. How do you think Africa should deal with this issue?
Well, I think Nigeria isn't learning from the rest of Africa.
Okay.
Instead of pointing fingers at Fulani people or this group or that group, why not learn lessons from other African countries who have managed to balance the basically feudal needs of the herdsmen compared to the technological needs of the growing infrastructure of the country? There's a big gap. The government needs to start thinking, because they've had 50 years to do it, how to bridge the gap between the rural communities, just generally speaking, and their needs to survive, against people who are living in what might be called more structurally advanced areas. There should not be a clash.
Okay.
And the middle people who could have stopped the gunmen, I don't care whether they're carrying weapons or not. In fact, I don't blame them, because no one's listening to them.
Okay.
The government is the one who needs to take care of its business and start addressing the tribal herdsmen.
Okay.
And look at the people who are in fear of being attacked and are building up their own ammunitions, so that this doesn't happen anymore. The government is to blame.
Right. You raised two issues there, but I just want to come to you very quickly. One of the issues she raised there, it's about Africa not learning from each other. What do you think Africa needs to do in order to tame this situation? Because it's spreading right across the west coast of Africa, and no country is spared, as it were.
Well, learning is one thing, listening is another, but I think the challenges in Nigeria are slightly different. I mean, Nigeria is one of the most populous countries in Africa, so the issues are multiplied 100 times fold that you would find in any other country. So when you have competing elements that are fighting for land, either be the Christian farmers or the Muslim herdsmen, then when you mix that with religion, it has a different connotation. So in this mix, it's a failure by government, and it's not just the current government, but successive governments that have come and gone who've not been able to address what has become a systematic issue over generations. Right. So, and of course, it's unfair to point the finger on government when these are issues which are synonymous with the people themselves.
Very interesting.
You know,
just bear with me a second. Yeah. I just need to ask a question here, and I'm going to come to you, Tunde. One of the things that has been missing from this conversation, this argument, this occurrence, is the owners of these cattle. These cattle are not owned by government, from what we understand. They are not owned either by state, individual states within the respective countries. They are actually owned by businessmen. Why then are we blaming government for these occurrences, and nobody is asking the responsibility or lack thereof for those who own it?
Well, I think for one thing, those who are herding the cattle, they're not literate people. So I don't think you can sit down with them and discuss some literate stuff.
No, I'm talking about the owners. I'm not talking about those herding them. Because the herders are not, they're not owners. They are working for somebody.
Right. Well, some of them own the cattle, and they are all nomadic people. You know, they've been suggesting that you have grazing territories where they would just take the cattle there and they graze them there. But these people are nomadic. I don't think that's going to work.
Is that why it should become the business of the state?
Well, I think
in the regard that they should have the freedom to sort of just roam. I mean,
no. I think the government needs to control them. They never used to be a problem. They never used to carry weapons. I think that is what they need to find out. Why are they carrying weapons now? Many people have suggested that some of them are agents of Boko Haram. That is Boko Haram.
That's in the particularly Nigeria's case.
This is just another way for Boko Haram to operate.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't think there's any evidence to that. But that's been suggested because no one knows why they are carrying weapons.
Okay. You wanted to say something earlier.
I was just saying, this is a problem that is now basically in the news, but has been simmering for 5 decades.
Absolutely, it's been going on for a while.
I do blame government because government is answerable and accountable to the people who voted for them. And it's wise for people to look to the government for answers, to get them to shake themselves up and deal with the question, because even though those people are illiterate, their points of view can be represented by someone who is not illiterate. So that's no reason for them not to be talked to, because if they are not talked to, then they become totally disenfranchised and very open to buying ammunition from Boko Haram-orientated groups.
The government has been blamed by a lot of people. Even senators are blaming the government. Oh, they're blaming the president.
Is it because of a lack of legislation?
Well, they said the president hadn't moved to do anything about this.
This would be the Nigerian situation.
In the Nigerian situation that the government.
Ayo, bear with me. Ayo, people taking the law into their own hands, as it were. It's a common thing that we're seeing right across the world at the moment. Yes. Everybody's up, if you like, in some form of angst against government, against governments around. But is it enough to then say that, because it's happening everywhere, that government too should be, as it were in the Nigerian case, it is only when there's a public outcry that the government reacts, apparently?
Well, this is a very difficult issue because you're dealing with sensitivities, with issues which go back generations. You're dealing with people who are living in fear, and that element of fear has been multiplied, which has now led to them bearing arms for protection. The question is, can government change people's perceptions overnight? No. People's psychological aspirations and the way they operate has gone on for generations. You can't change that. So the government can talk, they can encourage, but the true nature is that people who believe that the other side is about to get them and the only way they can protect themselves is with bare arms. And when they mix that with religion, and we've seen how religious violence in Nigeria can explode, it's difficult to control, cannot be contained. It's extremely difficult for any government to try and deal with that.
I was mentioning religion, and I'm going to come to you, Vuyiswa, because the religious aspect is one that's been highlighted in Nigeria as one of being perhaps the pivotal reason as to why there's been little reaction to the situation. Do you think that is the case?
if that point of view really had any validity, you'd have to call it prejudice. Full stop, right? Against another group. And there are many excuses you can be prejudiced against people. Their tribal roots, their religious roots, their height, their skin color, anything. But at the end of the day, you're still talking about individuals who want representation and an ability to live and thrive. And that's all these people are doing. I'm really reluctant to support an idea of pointing a particular finger to any one group or reducing them to being not worth speaking to or being of a particular religious orientation, etc. I really think the government has been very lax in its attention to its duty, and really that's where the pressure should go, because it has to be centrally coordinated, or there'll be chaos.
So Tunde, you're not in agreement there. You know, Vuyisiwa keeps reiterating the point that they're not being listened to. What is their requirement that has not been heard?
Well, they haven't actually voiced anything. You know, I think the problem is the government. I don't believe that anybody should carry weapons in the country and start killing innocent people. You know, so I think the government should put its might, you know, to work here. You know, to make sure that nobody is going to be going around killing people. Even if you have gripes, you know, killing other people is not the way to resolve your problem. These people haven't done anything to you. You herd your cattle. You go to some areas where the grass is dried up. So you drive them into somebody's farm. They eat up all the produce in there. And the guy has worked all year to cultivate his farm. Now he doesn't have anything to look forward to. That, and then if the guy talks, you kill him. It's a big problem.
I hear you. Very quickly, Ayo, final solution on this situation?
There's only one solution. The government, as Visual has said, should bear some responsibility, but ultimately I think it's local and tribal leaders that would have the affiliate. They can actually speak to the people. They are representing the people, and the people can respect them. So I think the government should call a meeting of some description which would bring those on board, and then they can then ultimately take it back to the people.
And I believe that is happening.
Okay, I wish we could go on. We'll take a quick break now. We have plenty more to discuss, so please join us in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Priscilla Winkwo and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel. Tunde Osho, Vuyisiwa Ngombongawa, and Ayo Johnson. We're still here. Democracy is is it a teething problem in Africa? Moving on swiftly to South Africa. It's been very, very interesting, has it not? Yes. Finally, the case of Jacob Zuma appears as though, you know, it's been settled, but then has it? I'm going to come to you, Vuyisiwa, because, you know, it's a subject that I think you're quite familiar with. We had the election of, you know, the new ANC leader.
Cyril Ramaphosa. Yes.
Ramaphosa. And now we have this issue of when and if and should Jacob Zuma go.
Yeah. It's a tricky one, and a lot of analysts are describing it as a delicate issue, because you're essentially talking about a man's pride and honor.
Right.
And that's important for any man, particularly for an African Zulu man. Okay? So, Cyril Ramaphosa is very sensitized to the issue, and I'm confident he will find a way of easing the pain, so to speak, because essentially speaking, he done wrong and we need to get him out, but we need to do it.
I mean, the whole question of corruption, we know.
Well, he did wrong, he did. He did wrong.
Is that not sufficient to say that he needs to go?
But it's also important to keep reiterating that under his watch, corruption blossomed. But that's true of every African nation post-independence. The minute we get our hands on power, we do have this issue, right? But so does Europe. But we are just less sophisticated about it, which is why we get pointed out about it. Now, South Africa, in its first 2 decades of freedom, has managed to get the cockroaches out into the spotlight.
Okay.
And so that's a good thing. I'm really happy with what's happening.
All right. I'm going to come to you because, you know, some would say that this is quite dangerous because you've got 2 people holding power. Yeah, so the whole Zuma situation, how do you see it? Do you see that it's going to pose a problem for South Africa, or should Zuma leave soon? Or?
Not at all. The ANC is an institution.
Right.
They're a freedom party. They are a party of liberation. They are here to stay. They will be here long beyond our generation. I expect Mr. Ramaphosa to become the next president. I don't think there'll be any competition on that. So the ANC, even if you see it being fractured, that's just for now. The true nature is when we come to elections, they will be united. To do with the current president, Mr. Zuma, I think it's slightly unfair on him. I think he's the leader of a very great nation. South Africa is a superpower on the African continent.
Right.
And of course, people are looking to that continent that it set the stage, set the standards. And again, issues around corruption, it's synonymous across Africa and no exception to South Africa. So I think it's unfair to try and embarrass him in the fashion that you're talking about.
But it's important.
Okay,
not to
all right. Bear with me a second. I have 2 questions here. I hear you with Africa being South Africa being a superpower. I thought my country, Nigeria, was, but you know that's what Aya would have us believe. But this whole situation with Zuma and Ramaphosa, this is not the first time we've seen it. When Mbeki was president, Zuma was in the position that Ramaphosa is now. And what did he do at the time? Because Mbeki had to leave somewhat unceremoniously, did he not? So it would seem as though it was you know, just history repeating itself.
Yeah, it looks like it, but one thing that I like in this development is what Ramaphosa himself has said, that whatever they do, they should make sure that they uphold the dignity of Zuma.
But having said that, Ramaphosa was, you know, it was suggested that he also had a role to play in the Mbeki situation. Is he doing this for South Africa, or is he doing this to satisfy his own personal political dreams?
2 different situations, because I believe at the time they were both in government. But I think now Ramaphosa is not in government, but Zuma is the president.
Well, he's now the leader of the ANC. So
I know,
he is.
but still, you know, the president is the president. Okay. And, you know, Ramaphosa is not in government. Because during the Mbeki time, I think both of them were in government.
Right.
You know, so I think it's a slightly different situation. And I like what Ramaphosa has said, that they need to uphold Zuma's dignity, not to embarrass him. You know, I think one thing I'm going to miss if Zuma leaves is his singing.
Coming back to you, you know, you said South Africa is a superpower. I still don't agree with you. Having said that, you know, there is a concern, though, that Zuma's continual remain will have an impact on the South African economy and, you know, the kind of damage that will come as a result of that. Should that not be sufficient reason to work on a not embarrassing exit, as it were, but to help him to go nicely?
Governments across the world, across Africa, when you have governments which are on their way out, like Zuma's is, where the time frame is short, you don't expect him to do anything. So South Africa has to bottle up, accept the status quo, that their economy would fail slightly, with the hope that it will reignite and move forward in the right direction with the new government. That's a fact of life. Using it to stigmatize Zuma at a time when he's very fragile, I think is wrong.
Right. Viswa, what should we make of Ramaphosa? How do we see him?
It's too early to say, but one thing you can say is he's a much more sophisticated business analyst and economist than Zuma ever will be. So that equips him to deal with the investor aspect, which is so important to South Africa's long-term future.
What about the land distribution row?
And he's also sophisticated and intelligent enough in terms of understanding the politics to be able to start addressing that, because he has benefited mightily as an individual post-apartheid. I mean, he's a multimillionaire, and so he's sensitive to the charge of forgetting his roots now that he's come up in the world. But the important thing is, I just think he has a more sophisticated, wider knowledge of how the political world system works than Zuma did, which gives the ANC a very good foundation to build something concrete. Because Zuma was a great nationalist, Mandela was the peacemaker. Zuma was the nationalist, so we could puff our chest up. Now we need to get realistic and deal with the problems.
So who is Ramaphosa? How do we describe him?
He's the pragmatist.
He's the pragmatist.
Who's going to deal with the practicalities of getting employment, training for the people before the country implodes.
Right.
Which is what's likely to happen if that doesn't get dealt
with. Nothing comes out later on about him that we don't
know. These things have a funny way of creeping up, right?
He has enough skeletons in his cupboard with regard to the Marikana massacre situation.
There we go.
So, but that's why he's sensitive.
But there is something we cannot ignore here, and that is the fact that the ANC are declining electorally. And that is, we now have the Democratic Alliance, and we also have the Economic Freedom Fighters.
For democracy.
And ANC are struggling. Are the other two parties likely to have any foothold given the crisis that's happening today?
I think they might. I don't know that they can knock off ANC. You know, ANC is still very strong, even though they're losing a little ground. But I don't know that they can knock them off. You know, they will still continue to be in power for a long time to come.
Okay. Ayo, how do you see this? Any challenges here, or is it just they're just marking, ticking the boxes as well?
Yes, very much so. Ticking the boxes, making the numbers, trying to get a face when they clearly don't. I mean, the ANC is here. We must accept them. They are here. We must celebrate them. We must embrace them. And irrespective of whatever problems they have, that's just part of parcel of what political parties and the operations are all about.
I think it's dangerous too.
Surely the decline, though, who's receiving those members that are falling away from the ANC? I would expect that these two parties will be picking them up, no?
Well, absolutely they are, because people have stuck with the ANC more out of a sense of traditional loyalty, and also because we're new to this idea of being free and practicing democracy. Let's not forget, we're only talking about 2 decades. We're not a politically sophisticated nation.
You are?
No, we are not. Relative to the world, we are not politically sophisticated because we've only had 2 decades to actually have the opportunity to vote. Now, that may sound like nothing to someone who's taken democracy for granted.
I feel the need to interrupt there. When you say that, I feel as though we're speaking about 2 types of South Africans. 2 different South Africans.
Oh, now we are being split up? Okay.
Well, no. You're saying here that, South Africa is not politically sophisticated, with regards to the world.
No, it's not. How can you be politically sophisticated as a nation in 20 years? Compare that to England. How many centuries?
But do we need to live for centuries in order to, come up? Can't we, just pick up what's...
Well, it takes time to get over nearly 400 years of psychological, physical, and economic oppression.
I agree.
Okay? So it's unfair, and this is what we always do with Africa, of comparing African nations to nations that have
it's not
exploited
a comparison,
them.
But there are lessons that could be learned, aren't there?
There are lessons to be learned, but I also think we need to be
Do we not have case studies that we could follow?
And fair to ourselves, and understand that the level of political education of the average South African is not as sophisticated as it needs to be for us to practice democracy in an effective way. That's the truth.
Okay.
That's why people will vote. I'll vote for the ANC. Forget the others. They don't even think about the issues.
I hope Ramaphosa, as you said, he's a pragmatist, will be able to take that on board and teach the African people. But on a lighter note, and teach the South Africans, but on a lighter note, African Nations Cup is about to happen. Okay, Ayo, who's going to win? Who do you see winning this?
Well, that'll be different. I think Nigeria stands a very good chance. I mean, they've shown previously. No. The thing about football is that you have generations of good and bad, and I think Nigeria's had some extremely good players in the 90s with Amokachi, Kini, and all of those lovely guys who did extraordinary things. And if they can carry Nigeria, including the African continent, they have a chance. But I'm not sure whether they have the new cycle of players that can do something extraordinary as we saw in the 90s. So maybe they can do that.
From what I've seen lately, I think Nigeria is ready. I think Nigeria is strong again.
Is it?
It's not as strong as in the 90s during the Yekini time.
Oh, those were extraordinary times.
Yeah, I mean, that was golden time. But
okay.
But I think
You think so? Brisbane, what do you reckon?
It's not my topic at
It's
all.
not your topic at all.
We're talking football here.
Okay, I'll speak
If
for
Nigeria
us.
can win, maybe that can uplift the nation together
I'll speak for
around
us.
more important issues.
I would love to see Nigeria win, but they normally have a better team at the younger, you know, the under 21s are really quite.
Do they?
And they're female. The women's team are also very good.
Excellent.
Yes, so I'd like to wish all the participating countries the very best and may the best team win. Well, don't forget to follow us at RealJHUK on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. I'm Priscilla Winkle from the entire team here in London, those you see and the ones you don't see. Goodbye. Thank you for watching Journalist Hangout UK and see you again soon.